Okay, recording's up. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today for this amazing panel and the second part of our Bracing for Impact series and training on fundraising during an election season. My name is Kafili Thomas, he, him pronouns. I am the Director of Program Partnerships here at Progressive Multiplier. If you've done one of the Fundraising Friday trainings, you've probably seen me before. And I have my amazing colleagues, Janet and Tiffany, our newest member of the Progressive Multiplier team, here with me today. And we have three lovely panelists that I will let introduce themselves to you in just 1 second. But for those who don't know Progressive Multiplier and who we are and what we do, we are a funding intermediary. We help organizations build a progressive movement of, by, and for everyday people. And we do this by organizing and leveraging funding to create on-ramps for progressive organizations to either start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earned revenue programs through both an online community of practice, of which you all are part of right now, and our grant making and support programs. We help build the progressive sector's revenue generation knowledge and skills so that it can amplify a people-powered movement. Wanted to give a huge shout out to our amazing partners at Resilience Initiative for putting this panel together. For folks who haven't had a chance to yet, please introduce yourself, name, org, and your role in the chat. And as a quick reminder and overview, in addition to these amazing panels and trainings that we do with Resilience Initiative, you are eligible for hands-on strategic assistance with either myself or one of my amazing colleagues at Progressive Multiplier, up to 5 hours of support. So if that's something that you're interested in, please reach out to either Michelle Mengel at Resilience Initiative, or you can reach out to me directly at kafili@progressivemultiplier.fund. So yeah, a little bit about what we are going over today. The training that we gave in the first panel, the first part of the series, was explaining what different strategies may look like when you want to fundraise in an election season. But there is no better knowledge base than people who have actually done it before. So we brought together three amazing panelists from orgs with a wide range of, connectivity to electoral work. So with us today, we have LaShonda Pickett-Renee from Ashe Cultural Arts Center. We have Brittany Link from Equality Florida and Aaliyah Bhatia from Vote ER. And I will create some space to give y'all a chance to introduce yourself, your orgs, and the work that y'all do. Anyone can go first.
LaShonda, kick us off.
Okay, I was quickly changing my my name to reflect the work. Good afternoon, good morning. I'm not sure where you're logging in from, in the country or the world. I bring greetings from the Ashe Cultural Arts Center on behalf of the Chief Executive and Equity Officer, Asali Devon Ecclesiastes. I'm LaShonda Pickett-Renee. I operate as the Chief Strategy Officer for Ashe. Ashe is an organization that has been based in New Orleans, Louisiana for the last now 26 years. It celebrated 25 years last year. The first 25 years of Ashe was focused on holding and creating space for artists and culture bearers and also community members to come and to celebrate and to convene and to create together. And the next 25 years of Ashe is really all about building community power. And so we have this space. We are, we've been in community for a long time. Our theory of change is that artists and culture bearers are the sacred messengers, and they are the real change makers in community. And so all the things that we do, whether they be affordable housing initiatives, economic development initiatives like building a boutique community and employee-owned hotel, or be they initiatives focused on young people who are engaged in civic education, or really thinking about what does a healthy and well community look like. All of those initiatives are really centered around the voice of and the platforms of artists and culture bearers as we center them in our work, and do the work of community and economic development, and really now focus on community power building. Shall I say a little bit more, or will we kind of have time to get a little bit more into initiatives?
Yeah, we have time. We're here for an hour and a half. So
All
if you
right.
got it, yeah, go for it.
I've got a couple of things, right? So I mentioned that, we spent the first 25 years focused on creating space. And then this next 25 years being about community power building. And we have three core initiatives that we are focused on, that are really centered around community power building, specifically related to, but not really well, no, related to and connected to, what's happening in the electoral space. But really, it's about the community. It just so happens that what we recognize and what we've learned in the last 25 years is that in order to do the community work in the way that we want to do it, in the way that we know it needs to be done, that we can't simply focus on those things that are happening at the community level and the relationship level, but that we also have to go to the systems level. And so policy has really become central to the work that we're doing, and really connecting our community to policy so that they are informing policy, so that they are really directing the people who are supposed to be representing us in our interests to understand that the policies that they support, the policies that they go against, they really should be reflective of the values of the communities that they should be serving. And so that has really come to be an important part of the work that we're doing. We have a Building Community Power initiative, which we are doing in partnership with many organizations here in New Orleans. And we are doing a series of charrettes where we are convening community members to come together and to have a meal and to talk about what they believe that they deserve as it relates to being in community. And so we're talking about things like housing rights, health equity, education, economic justice, criminal justice, as well as environmental justice. And we're sharing with each other our experiences, and we're saying these are the things that we think are important. These are the things that we value. These are the interests that we have as a community, and we want our policies to reflect that and to protect that. And so what we'll be collating over the next several months as a part of this initiative is a ballot initiative to where we have a community power policy that goes on the ballot and is voted for by community members, to be able to send a really strong and direct message to our elected officials and our community leaders that we are paying attention and that we're clear about what it is that we believe that we deserve and that we desire in terms of being in community and trusting our elected officials and our community leaders to represent us. We also recognize that young people need to be a part of this. And so we had a Young Fierce Citizen initiative, which is focused on young people age 18 to 24. They are engaged in educating themselves. So they are being educated around civic engagement and activism. And they're also going out and then taking what they're learning and educating their peers around civic engagement and activism, and advocacy. And so they're working on social messaging campaigns that are really centering these important issues that we're talking about, and also translating, if you will, for their peers, policy and things that are happening in the electoral space that are important. And so, that has been, we are on a second cohort of young people who are doing that. They have been working in partnership with many of our partners and also working in our various initiatives across the organization to infuse their insight, but also to glean information that they can be taking back to their peers. So I feel like I'm taking up a lot of space, so I'm going to be quiet, but we have so much happening as it relates to this work. And we think that building community power is about understanding what the collective is in need of and leveraging the resources and activating the assets of the collective.
Thank you so much, LaShonda. It sounds like y'all do incredible work, and I really appreciate the level of organizational growth and development across your theory of change and how you're thinking not only in 5 or 3 or 1 year plans, but 25-year narrative arcs. I think that that's really insightful, and I'm very glad that you're here in this space. And I think that there's a lot that orgs can learn from you and your org's experience and evolution. I'm going to pass it next to Brittany Link from Equality Florida. Brittany, if you feel ready to go and introduce
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Brittany Link, she, her. I am the communications director at Equality Florida, and we are the state's largest civil rights organization dedicated to securing full equality for Florida's LGBTQ community. And since our founding, we have become one of the largest statewide LGBTQ communities in the country. We have over 400,000 members currently, with over 40 staff that reach across the state. And I would say one of Equality Florida's superpowers is that we were founded in 1997 in a very hostile political environment. And as y'all can probably assume, based on what's currently happening, we have lived in that environment for almost 30 years. And we were formed after the state legislature passed the state's version of DOMA, which banned same-sex couples from getting married. And that's when our executive director, Nadine Smith, and co-founder Stratton Politzer decided that there will never be another moment in the Florida Capitol that our voices weren't heard. That sort of, nothing about us without us. And so since then, we have had a full-time lobbyist staff member in the Florida Capitol for all 60 days of Florida's legislative session since our formation. And what's really made us unique is that even though we've, been in the face of, a deeply hostile opposition, we've been able to carve out really important victories for our community despite that, including we were able to secure marriage equality for Floridians 6 months before the Supreme Court made that the law of the land with a lawsuit that we had filed in a court case that made its way to the federal level. We also were instrumental in ending the ban on adoption for gay and lesbian people in the state of Florida. And most recently, we were able to really change the narrative around DeSantis's parental rights bill in education to paint a more accurate picture of the impacts of that legislation by naming it the Don't Say Gay or Trans bill. And that really elevated that legislation to an international story that garnered over $2 billion worth of earned media around that policy. But more importantly, it tied DeSantis's reputation with an agenda of anti-freedom, censorship, and book banning, which has been a huge part of our messaging over the last few years in particular. And we think is one of the main reasons why he didn't make it for his presidential bid this past cycle. So with that, we really see Florida as the frontline state when it comes to battling extremism. And we have been able to really take what we have learned and export that to other states, knowing that what happens in Florida does not stay in Florida. We have a long history of that, right? Going all the way back to Anita Bryant and seeing how her crusade, her anti-LGBTQ crusade really grew into a national crusade against LGBTQ people. And so we have really, taken what we've learned. We've worked really closely with our partners across the state to say, hey, this is the messaging that we've seen work. Here are the things that we see, have not worked. And we've also told people, hey, use Florida as an example any chance you can get, right? We are okay if you have lawmakers who are coming out and saying, hey, we don't want to be anything like Florida right now. We don't want to touch that. We look at that and we say, hey, that means we're doing our job if we're able to help other states, stop censorship bills from passing in their legislatures. So with that, we also kind of more on the electoral side, because we do have a C3, a C4, and a PAC through Equality Florida. And on the election side in particular, our organization plays a few major roles, including, providing priorities to our funders and supporters about how we think we can win in Florida, targeting hundreds of thousands of pro-equality voters across the state, targeting them with messaging about why this election cycle matters, and mobilizing them to actually make it to the ballot box or fill out their vote by mail ballot and send that in. And then we also, every election cycle, provide a really robust voter guide, which usually has over 100 candidates that Equality Florida Action PAC has endorsed through a very intensive vetting process, looking at sort of key issues that they support or don't support, their previous voting record if they have one, how competitive their race is, if they are an openly LGBTQ candidate or not. And we get that out to our supporters and to voters across the state, and have races that we endorse up and down the ballot. So that's just kind of a few things that we have going on in our world. But yeah, happy to pass it back over.
Thank you so much, Brittany. As a very new resident of the state of Florida, I can't speak enough to the importance of your work and orgs like yours across the state and across the country. So very thankful to have you here and to spread the good word about the awesome work that y'all are doing. And last but certainly not least, we will pass it over to Aaliyah Bhatia from Vote ER.
LaShonda and Brittany, just such a treat to hear about the incredible work y'all are doing. Before I share a bit about Vote ER, can I get either raise of hand emoji or in the chat, have you ever gotten a medical bill you didn't understand? Ever gotten, all right, yeah, I see some hands raised, 2 hands raised. So my journey towards Vote ER, actually my background before Vote ER was actually in education work in New Orleans and in Atlanta and in Northeast Mississippi. And my journey to Vote ER actually ran through 2, I think, important stories. The first is I had just wrapped up graduate school. As you can imagine, graduate schools do not offer COBRA. And as part of my move back to Atlanta, I landed up going through 5 different health insurance cards in 5 months. And you would often pay one thing at the grocery store for the generic medication and then get some bill in the mail later saying, well, because you're actually covered under this thing and not under this thing, here's how much it actually costs. What in the world? Graduate school, degree, I can't figure out whether I am, insured or not. And just thinking to myself, gosh, this is a really messed up system. So in December of 2019, I find myself as part of a leadership program that we have in Metro Atlanta. I was doing some really embedded sort of community ride-alongs. So I went on a fire ride-along, and then I went on an emergency medical services ride-along. And in the dead of winter 2019, I knock on the door of this manager, and his name's Scott. He opens the door. He looks me up and down and is like, you're one of those young idealistic kids from that leadership program. All right, I'm here to give you your ride along. And as we drive around town and he shows me the ambulances and the EMTs who are serving community, there are a couple of things that become immediately obvious. The first is Scott and I have different perspectives on how the world works. He's a few generations older than me, and he's from a very different part of Atlanta from me. I'm from a very diverse part of town. He's from a very white part of town. But the things we were seeing were the same, which is his team was responding to impossible situations. Folks who were experiencing homelessness, who were calling 911 in the middle of the winter because they were cold and didn't have a place to stay. Folks where food insecurity was the cause of something that they were, experiencing medically. Folks who had changes in insurance, where something that was covered under their last insurance was not covered under their current one, and now it's an emergency. And at the end of my ride-along, I turned to Scott and I'm like, if I give you this magic wand and you can only wave it once and you can only fix one thing, what are you going to do? And Scott said, if I could only change one thing, I wish all my patients would vote. Because if all my patients voted, all of our elected officials would put the money where it needs to go in affordable housing, grocery store in every neighborhood, good jobs training. And when I needed to get people an ambulance, I'd have the money to get them one on time. Again, Scott and I disagree about a lot of things, but at the end of the day, this was something that we both, really resonated with. A month later, I hear about this ER doctor who's helping his patients to vote. He was based out of Boston, wanted somebody to come on board and help scale the work nationally, and that was when I hopped on board at Vote ER. And what we do is we help hospitals, clinics, and health professionals register their patients to vote, get access to your mail-in ballot, get access to what's on your ballot, and really get educated about what you can vote on. So we provide badges that look like this to health professionals around the country, so that they can prompt their patients to check their voter registrations, make sure their registration is up to date. You can imagine right now there's a lot of questions about making sure that young folks turn out this year. Our biggest community of health professionals is pediatricians. They ask their 18, 19, and 20-year-olds, hey, checking in, are you safe at home? Are you wearing your seatbelt? Oh, by the way, you're 18 now. As part of being an adult, you have a new power, which is to be able to vote. Have you registered to vote? And so that is what we do. And then I think LaShonda and Brittany nailed it around how important policy shift is, right? Health professionals are some very busy people. We don't want to, add an additional thing on their plate. And so in addition to our more direct work with health professionals, we also work with major organizations and major government bodies to get voter registration into more systems. Have you ever gotten a MyChart notice after a health appointment? So we've worked with MyChart to put voter registration into their hospital intake forms and discharge forms, so that it's not something the health professional has to ask, but just comes naturally as part of your process. So it's an honor to be here. I hope that I'm helpful in sharing a little bit about things, and I'm just grateful for all the great work y'all are doing out in the world, and excited to chat a little bit about fundraising cycles and the election season, and also to learn, frankly, from all of you in this room as well. I have one thing to name, which is I will have a hard stop at 3, and I apologize for having to leave a little early. So thank you for your grace.
No problem. Thank you so much, Aaliyah. Great. So those are our awesome panelists. Really excited to dive deep on basically the history of what has happened fundraising wise in the last 4 years related to the 2020 and 2022 elections, and how that's going to inform work going forward into the 2024 election. As you can tell from our panelists and the orgs that they work from, we've tried to get you a wide variety of organizations that deal with community building and power building in their own separate ways, but are all in some way tangentially connected to the electoral system as a lever of change. So if you took the first training that I did, I want to bring us back to the remembering uniqueness session. So every election is built the same, but the conditions in which it exists were not always the same. So thinking back 4 years ago, we were still in the really, really dire throes of the pandemic. The Black Lives Matter movement was still happening at full strength. One of the largest symbols of human protest in human history was occurring there. We were grappling with a recession, the largest inflation and economic insecurity in probably a very long time, since probably the 2008 financial crisis, as well as this new threat of democracy being on the ballot in and of itself. And that the framing of the election was that it was not only about the candidates, but about the democratic experiment in America as a whole. So would love to hear from our panelists. Aaliyah, I know you have to leave early, so we're going to start with you. What was the situation your org was in at the time? How did these circumstances and just the election as a whole influence your fundraising decisions and how you incorporated that in? And what were the results of that? What were some successes, maybe some unexpected things that happened, and things that you would want to shift if you had to do it again?
Yeah. I know we talked about whether to do the full arc versus the individual. For Vote ER, it might be easier if I do sort of the where we started it to where we ended. In 2020, We were a project. We were housed in Mass General Hospital. So we were fiscally sponsored. And our impact was driven by young health professionals and medical students, all of whom are in $1 bajillion of debt because of the system that we have. And so while we did make a few asks at various points during that year, very, very few, I think we were very sensitive because a lot of these folks were going through, they were the caregivers among many other caregivers during the pandemic. And then on top of that, their whole, like everything about the things they were like trying to do in the world was like being thrown into question by the pandemic, essentially. And so I think we felt pretty hesitant about those asks, and we leaned very heavily on foundations during that year. As we decided we wanted to go from being a project to an organization, lots of learning, lots of growth. We tried two things that didn't work, and I hope it is useful to share the things that failed as well as the things that succeeded. The two things that I would say didn't work was, I think we tried to target asks at a community that just doesn't have funds. That was, I think, a thing that we didn't think enough about before we did it. We only did it a few times, but I think like in retrospect, probably that wasn't the right like group for us to look at. And then the other thing that didn't work is we did work with a external group in 2022 where we couldn't translate our brand to what they were sharing around fundraising. There was something about the story that wasn't translating and landing. And so that didn't seem to work as well. There are a couple of things that slowly started to work over time, which were, we run a fellowship that is a training on community organizing for health professionals, and we charge on a sliding scale so that a dean of a med school pays a very different amount than a community health worker. Can go from $50 all the way to $2,000, basically, is the sliding scale. So that is a earned revenue option that helps us, do some of that fundraising. And then also we did start working with a different contractor that I think has done a much better job matching our brand. And so even while we're still building up the capacity to fundraise with it, we at least feel some resonance in the authenticity that the asks match who we are as an organization. And I think we're still learning. And I think like one of the things is, I think VODR, there's multiple causal chains for our work to have an impact. And I think like packaging that for a small dollar funder has been something that we're struggling with. And so if any of y'all have thought a lot about how to do that, I will welcome your perspective on that. But I think that's how do you explain the work we do in a bite-size way is something we're still learning. So that's, I think, the full arc of where we are. I think we're starting to really see the benefits of the long-term brand aligned drip strategy and asks. I think we were hopeful that as we are in this moment of somewhat feeling stagnant within the election cycle, I'm really hopeful that there's a moment of energy, because I think we are leaning on the last month before the election to be a time that like people heavily engage. And I think like I have many concerns about the world, but a concern as a leader among many that I have is, that was the plan, and is the plan about to like be impacted by all the things happening around us. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. One thing that stands out about what you said, and is something that we covered in the first part of the training, was storytelling and how to match a narrative arc. A lot of times orgs will have like a consultant, like I'm assuming your consultant was like a development consultant, right? So they only handled like comms when it came to like those specific asks. And sometimes those like not only may not fully match the arc that you want to tell as a development team around your fundraising, but also how does that match your overall narrative, right? So if I come across VODR because I go to the doctor and I'm like, oh, these guys are dope, like let me check out what they're talking about, and I go on your social media and it carries one message and maybe that's way more positive, and then your ask hits me like doom and gloom, everything's falling, everything's on fire, give me $20 right now. It's like jump scare. Whoa, where did that come from, right? So making sure that whatever you have carries throughout, and no matter how people engage with your org, they get that same kind of messaging, I think is a great takeaway from that. Brittany, would love to hear about your 2020 and how that evolved and developed as far as, the same kind of framework.
Yeah. So 2020 in Florida was a very unique year. It was really seen across the country as one of the key swing states in the presidential election in particular. And so to kind of back up a little bit, our organization for 20 years leading up to 2020 has been really trying to break through in the electoral funding world. We have been stewarding, or third-party organizations doing electoral work and trying to explain to them the importance of turning out our constituency and breaking through the narrative that LGBTQ voters and pro-equality voters in particular are these super voters, that they don't need messaging, that they don't need mobilization, that they're just going to go vote on their own at a really high rate, which is just not true. In fact, what we have been telling folks is, not only do we need to remind people to get out and vote, and provide a very specific message to our community about the importance of that election, but it actually needs to come from a trusted messenger like Equality Florida. So just because you're an organization and you're going to slap a rainbow sticker somewhere does not mean that those folks are going to, be prompted to go and vote. It really needs to come from somebody that they trust. And so 2020 actually became that sort of breakthrough moment for us, where we were invited to the table with some other really big progressive organizations doing the work, like America Votes, like the Florida Alliance. And so that was really incredible for us because there was over $200 million being flowed into Florida to help do this work. And that meant that in 2020, we actually received some of our biggest gifts ever. We actually hit gifts that were more than six figures to help us do this elections work. And a big part of that too, actually going back to COVID, there was a huge push to get pro-equality voters to register to vote by mail. And so that was a really big part of our C3 electoral work in 2020. And a lot of funding helping us to get out the word and to get folks to vote and to kind of go to like one of the successes before Election Day in November. Actually, 63% of the pro-equality voters that we had targeted, which was a list of 1.4 million people, 63% of those folks had voted before Election Day. And so we were able to show how, again, it was so important for us to get that funding early and to use it to try to get our folks to vote before Election Day and make sure that their voice was actually heard. And so with that too, Equality Florida Action PAC, we are just a state and local PAC. So we are not allowed to endorse in the federal election. And so we actually end up having kind of different goals. We really do focus heavily on like, what are our state legislative priorities? What are some of the other municipal in 2020, our local elections really focused on fighting back against extremist takeovers in school boards. And so we had a really big elections plan kind of geared towards that, along with then our key sort of legislative races in the state house and state senate. But as folks know, as we were just talking about how crucial 2020 was at the federal level, we actually, for the first time in our organization's history, asked our board of directors and made the decision that we as an organization were going to endorse at the federal level. And so we did actually go out and endorse Biden-Harris against Trump and ran a really big C4 specific campaign focused on that election. And we also saw funds then coming through to help us get out the word, really highlight Trump's anti-LGBTQ agenda, compared to Biden-Harris's pro-equality agenda. So yeah, that was really kind of one of the really big moments for us, was being able to endorse in that race. But I would say, again, for 2020, and as we get into 2022 and 2024, the story has not been the same. We are still fighting for additional funding for some of those key races, but I will say that since being able to break through that table after 20 years of really trying to steward folks, we still have a seat at that table, which is critical. And again, we are constantly telling people that, you know, how critical our constituency is, and that being in that room makes a really big difference. So that's kind of where we're at right now, in terms of, yeah, 2020 election fundraising for Equality Florida. But actually, Aaliyah, to go back to your point too, that is one of the things that we are still working on. Yes, we've broken into the bigger funder space, which has been absolutely critical for our work. But what we have not been able to do well, and even since, is try to grow that grassroots donor base for our electoral programming work. So as you'll know, when we talk about 2022 and 2024, if we don't get those big gifts, it makes a huge difference in what we're able to do.
Thank you so much for that, Brittany. I really appreciate it. One quick follow-up question, something that you really brought up that I think resonated with me was the conversation about getting a seat at the table, right? And finally breaking through. There are going to be, depending on your focus areas, these inflection points where the spotlight is on your focus issue, right? And there's money pouring in. But how do you get to that space where you're actually being recognized for the work that you do? If you could say like one thing that you think made the biggest difference in 2020 to like bring that spotlight to your org and your work, I think that would be super helpful.
Yeah, I think having a very clear elections plan, and I think you all maybe discussed that in like the impact part one, but having an elections plan super early in the season that also shows our impacts from the previous election cycles, right? So we can show people, hey, these are the number of like endorsed candidates from Equality Florida Action PAC that won their races. These are the number of people we know turned out after we were able to target them. And we were able to do that with this tiny budget. If we had a much bigger budget, this is the impact that we'd actually be able to have. And so I know for our team, like funders really being able to see that clear plan, that clear impact where they can say, hey, I have $100,000, you know, what are you going to do with that? We don't even have to think. We can just go straight to our plan and say, this is exactly where we're going to plug that in. These are the treatments people are going to get, whether it's digital, whether it's mail, whether it's phone calls, whether it's knocking on doors. And they feel that, you know, that by investing in that, they're going to see an increase in turnout.
Great. I think that's super helpful. LaShonda, let's talk about you and Ashay's work in 2020. And I know you said you all had like kind of an evolution of how you looked at engaging with electoral work that I think would be very helpful to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So 2020 was a pivotal year for Ashe, not just because what the world was going through, but the founder, Carol B. Bell, retired. And so it was the first year that our current chief executive and equity officer came into leadership, and in fact came into being in terms of a role, because previously it was the chief executive officer. But as our new leader came into that space and started to really look around at the work that we were doing, he recognized that equity was really just central to what we do and really needed to be named. And so culture starts at the top. We are a cultural institution, and so thus changed the title to Chief Executive and Equity Officer. And I note that because, like I said, there was the transition between the founder and the new leader. So that in and of itself, anyone who's ever done fundraising or been in space, in nonprofit space where leadership change happens, relationships change, the ability to continue to build momentum and or to shift narrative can be really, really difficult. And so there were several key things that were happening as well, right? So I'm going to just give a couple of dates for us. March 13th, 2020, Breonna Taylor was killed. Also, March 13th, 2020, the COVID lockdown officially happened across the nation. And then May the 25th in 2020, George Floyd was murdered. And so all of the upheaval that we experienced as a community, as a nation, as a globe around and related to these issues directly impacted us as an organization and of course us as a community. And we saw what $49.5 million, billion dollars committed by corporations to support work related to serving the Black community, which we only, I think, have seen a fraction of that, as in like less than a percentage point of that actually dispersed. And so those things are important to us as a community, as an organization, because all of the change that happened from that time to this time has really, I think, led us to note that yes, as a beginning of a new leadership, saying that equity is important and central to what we do, to being able to say that it's not enough for us to just name equity as being important to what we do, but for us to understand what are the things that we can do to leverage our platform and our 26 years of being as an organization to be able to help realize equity. And so when I think about, being able to fundraise, a lot of that looks like narrative, but it also looks like language specifically, right? Because what I recall prior to 2020, there was a lot of discomfort around naming things like Black Lives Matter, even using the word Black to refer to initiatives and to programming. We were softening words and using people of color or, disadvantaged or anything other than saying Black, right? And now here we find ourselves again in 2024, where it's again becoming a challenge and not just becoming, we're having to soften, but we're the indicators are that there's no room for naming who we're actually serving or naming communities that specifically are in need. We now want to completely take and strip identity from communities when we're talking about them, in terms of engaging funders, whether it be at the federal level, philanthropic level, corporate level, because of the pendulum swinging back in the other direction. And so that has really impacted us as an organization in terms of our fundraising, because what had opened up, or what we thought had opened up as this, trove of dollars that would be available to support the work that we're doing, finally at the scope and scale that is required, we've started to see that really just close, right, and become a potentially an even smaller window than it was before. And so a big part of our focus, we are a 501c3, so there are certain things that we are not able to do, but education is certainly one that we can. And partnership is something that we have as a superpower. We've been in community a long time, and we are able to pick up the phone and call on our community members. And that includes our partner organizations and individuals who are influential in the community. So we do a lot of convening and having conversation around what is needed, and even bringing to the table some of our other partners who do have the ability to maybe engage in ways that we can't, given that we are a 501c3. But what we do want to do, and what we know that we can do, is ensure that our community is informed. And so as we're having our Building Community Power initiative, every single charrette that we are convening, it is certainly about, the election in terms of, again, education, right? And so every single charrette that we have is focused on a topic. And not just we want to talk about housing rights or health equity, but we want to bring expertise to the table, to our community, to be able to share data, to be able to share experience, and also to be able to ensure that what is really important that community members should know is offered in a way that's digestible. So we don't have people talking at or over our community. We have people coming to the table who, one, represent the community, and two, who are experts and can bring that data to life, right? They can make policy practical and personal, so that when people think about what it is that they want to vote on or need to vote on, or what they need to say to their elected officials, or ask them to do or not do, they can do it in a way that is informed and that does increase their power in this space as they're activated as individuals and as voters. And so, that has really been a big part of how we've really moved forward. Also managing funder relationships. We've really focused on, okay, our pool of funders may not continue to grow at the rate that we maybe saw it grow during the pandemic because of the Black Lives Matter movement. And there was sort of the movement, or what was it, moment or movement, right? And so there was a level of momenting that happened. So maybe there were some folks who were supportive at a certain point, but now are no longer, or folks that we thought we were going to be able to continue to cultivate relationship with or establish, that has stalled maybe, or corporations that we believed were going to be, fulfilling their commitments that haven't. And so we can't control that, but what we can do is, again, leverage our superpower, which is connecting, which is relationship building. And we've been, working with some of our funders and partners, and they have been coming together and helping us to connect with others. And so we may not be able to call on certain people because we don't know them, but we know someone who does. And so we've been really leaning on that and connecting with our current partners and funders and just asking them, right? Like, hey, this is where we are. This is what we're doing. This is where we see our organization going. This is what our community is telling us it needs. Can you help us? And these are the ways that we would like for you to help us, whether that's sharing our message, whether that's connecting us to another resource or funder, or whether that's advising us to help us think about how we're framing our messaging or how we are talking about the work that we're doing, especially in this environment where language matters, and that language has shifted pretty significantly in a short amount of time with not a lot of notice, right? So, we're now no longer talking about Black people or Hispanic people. We're now talking about socially and economically disadvantaged individuals, right? Completely stripping identity from people. So I feel like I went on a tangent, and I don't know if I answered your question, but that has been kind of where our arc has been from 2020 to now.
Thank you so much. And no, you really did answer the question. I think that something that came up that really struck me was your focus on language and the duality of it, making politics and engaging in politics accessible for people, but also talking about your work and bringing power in the language that you use, and that making it inaccessible for funding, and the duality of that, and how do we sit with that, and what does that really mean for where we are as a sector and the work that we're trying to do and the things we have to dismantle internally as well. So I think that that's super profound, and especially for groups that are led by, not white cishet, leadership, that's an issue that orgs have focused on and have had to deal with for a long time. So I think that's super important. Aaliyah, I know you have to go really, really soon. So just wanted to see if you would briefly be able to cover slightly what has happened in 2022 and what you all are looking at doing for 2024.
Yeah, so on the sort of diversifying our fundraising front, I think we tried a lot of things in 2022 that there's some that worked and then some that, we needed to grow in. So the one that worked was we started charging for some of our programs, again, on a sliding scale, to be thoughtful about that. The thing that didn't work as well was trying to, we did list acquisition as a part of our small dollar strategy, and that didn't work as well as we wanted it to. So the way that's changing this year, first on the earned revenue front, we've grown an additional stream, which is if you order a VOTR badge and you're a health professional, it's free if you're an individual. If you want to hand out badges or want your logo on badges, we charge for that. So we've kind of created what is easy for us, shipping you an individual badge. What is hard for us, mass producing badges for you is hard for us. We will charge you for it. That both decreases the number of people who want that thing that's hard to do, but also makes it so they have to pay us if they want it. So that has, I think we've grown a couple different things we can charge for that are in alignment of interest. We're charging in a way that feels aligned with what they should be doing and what we should be doing. I think the other way in which we've adapted is we're doing a lot more acquisition through, what's it called? Organic acquisition, excuse me, where we're running more ads and then people add their email to the list and then we target them with asks. And so I think we're doing a lot more of that. And then I think that another thing that we did this year that was completely different than 2020 is we have stood up a volunteer fundraising group of health retirees who basically run fundraisers and like do event fundraising. That has been a hugely successful strategy for us. And there's something about communities and tapping communities that frankly don't look like our founder or me. And I think that that has been really fascinating to watch, is that some of the folks coming to those fundraisers, they're people who our founder is an ER doctor at Mass General and like knows of them, but like they respond to the people in their generation who look like them. And so we've gotten a bunch of those folks to like head up a fundraising effort that helps like encourage and capture that group of people. And it's been very successful. So I think those are the three things, is like shift in strategy of two things that like we could do better with from 2022, and then a completely new strategy that has worked very well. So.
Great. Thank you so much. I know you have to go really soon. One quick touch point that I think interests me, because 2022 was also the first election post the fall of Roe. And with your work being so tangential to healthcare, did you see that affect both your programming and maybe your fundraising as well?
Yeah, very direct impact on programming. So we work very closely with the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and then have since added a bunch of reproductive health medical associations, essentially. So very direct impact on programming. I think that the same reason why those groups flocked to us also makes it hard to raise money off of. So what are they thinking? What is a hospital in Ohio thinking last year? They're thinking, I'm not allowed to take a stand on this ballot measure, but I want to do something I know will make sure that my people have a say. Great, vote ER. You're not taking a stand either, but you're a really simple way to get our patients and our health professionals registered to vote. Tag, you're it, right? The good news about that is that we were the safety harbor for a lot of folks who felt they couldn't take a position. The bad side of that is that we weren't able to be direct in a way that generated fundraising off of it. And so we're pretty cautious because we don't take like outward stands as an organization because of the constituency we work with and their needs to be able to navigate their sort of government relations officers and things like that. So it's benefited us programmatically, but not necessarily from a fundraising standpoint. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that. That's very insightful. And thank you so much for being here. Really appreciated it so much. And we'll definitely try and have you back on another panel some other time. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, and honored to learn from others. Bye.
Great. Brittany, we can pass to you then on your 2022, how that went and what that's done to inform 2024 decision making around fundraising.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so unlike 2020, which want to be like blurry and then not blurry. So unlike 2020, where at the federal level, folks saw Florida as a key state, that was not the case in 2022. We were not one of the major Senate targets on the map. And so basically all of that money we saw come in 2020 nearly just disappeared. So it was a pretty brutal fundraising election cycle in 2022, along with, honestly, just some of the losses that we saw in general. A couple of things that we did learn and that we felt like, could take and bring to 2024 was we started a program of candidate bundling. And so basically one of the things that we've always wanted to do more of is help our priority candidates fundraise. that helps, make us, again, kind of one of those people where candidates want to come to us for our endorsement. They see us as a major player in the election cycle. And so if we can fundraise for them along within Equality Florida Action PAC, it gives us a little bit more clout when we're doing the work. And so we started a little bit later than we wanted to. We were already kind of in that general election cycle in 2022, but we did create a campaign that we called Support the Seven, which was sort of our 7 top priority candidates. They were all, either in our legislative priority or the governor. So that was when Charlie Crist was running against Governor Ron DeSantis as he was running for re-election. And even within a short period of time, we were able to raise $50,000 through that candidate bundling program. And so we kind of came away with that from, hey, we were able to raise that in a really short period of time. Our goal really is to, over time, make that a $500,000 program where we're able to bundle for candidates. And so for 2024, for instance, we have 3 major top priorities that we have been telling our funders, that we have been telling our supporters as a part of our election strategy. One is to break the Republican supermajority in the Florida House and to pick up 1 Senate seat in the Florida legislature. We tell folks that the reason why, obviously, is that we will greatly limit the number of anti or extremist bills that are coming from Tallahassee if we're able to do this. 2 is to increase LGBTQ representation in the Florida legislature from 2 to 6. So, and we've already won 1 with Senator-elect Carlos Guillermo Smith in the Orlando area. And then 3 is to take back school boards who take back school boards from extremists. So those are kind of our 3 things. And through that, we're going to have like 3 different sort of bundles based on priority candidates that sort of fit those strategies for Equality Florida Action PAC. And again, the goal is to help fundraise, because even if we're able to, somebody calling me through Zoom, I've never had that before. So our goal really is if we can raise $25,000 for our priority candidates for each race, where we know that will be a difference maker, that's really what we want to do. So on top of the sort of act, and we're using ActBlue as a way to candidate bundle, we've seen that as one of the easier platforms where you can set it up and it goes straight to their campaigns versus the PAC needing to spread that out. So we've been using ActBlue for the candidate bundling. We have also then been hosting in-person fundraisers for priority candidates as well. And so we did that for the governor's race in 2022. We held one for Charlie Crist, where in one evening we were able to raise $125,000 for his campaign. And again, our goal is to really expand that fundraising program too. So we've already brought that into the 2024 election cycle as well, where we've held fundraisers for Carlos Guillermo Smith and Joe Saunders, 2 openly LGBTQ candidates running for the state legislature in Florida. And with one of our fundraisers that we held earlier in the summer, we were able to raise $100,000 for their campaigns. And that is so critical, especially to start that fundraising early. I think that's one of the things we're always trying to remind ourselves too, because we can spend a lot of time trying to get all the details perfect before we implement something. But the sooner we can fundraise, whether it's for our own electoral program or for these candidates, for instance, with Carlos's race, we have been for months trying to help fundraise for his campaign. And then when it came time for qualifying in June, we were able to actually prevent any other opponent from qualifying in his race. And so he didn't even have a primary, no general. He just, with no opposition whatsoever, has been elected to the Florida legislature. And so that's something where, again, if you can fundraise for folks earlier, they're hopefully, you're going to kind of prevent them from having that strong opposition in their races. So that's kind of another thing that we're looking forward to in 2024. And I would say all of this is we always wish we're doing this stuff months earlier than we're actually doing it. So we always tell ourselves, like, election cycle after election cycle, we're going to start earlier. And we did for a few of our priority candidates this year, and for some of the campaign bundling, but our goal is always to do that just a little bit more. And as I said before too, you know, in 2024, we still haven't seen nearly the same resources coming in from national organizations the way that we did in 2020. Our overall elections plan currently is to spend $2 million. And again, that is our, you know, if we had $2 million, y'all, this is what we could do. Like, we know we have 750,000 pro-equality voters that we're trying to target. Like, we could implement all of these different programs if we have this. But realistically, if we don't get that additional funding, we're looking at spending about $500,000 this cycle that we have budgeted, that we know we have or already have grants for. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that. I know that was kind of a lot, but it kind of goes back to the point again of we're always looking for ways to grow our small dollar, individual dollar donor program, because as I mentioned, you know, we're going to plan to spend 500,000 versus 2 million if we can't find a way to fill that gap.
I really appreciate the focus on like grassroots fundraising and how that reflects. I think a lot of orgs, LaShonda, you kind of mentioned this in your work, and I know we talked about this earlier. It's like that boom and bust cycle, especially around elections, and how there's been a rapid shift post 2020, almost like a backlash where that pendulum has swung back. And so like a lot of the promises from that time have gone kind of unfulfilled across the board, and how that affects you know, fundraising and projections and how orgs can develop and sustain themselves. All right, great. LaShonda, I'm going to pass to you, and then we're going to open it up for a little bit of Q&A before we close out. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sounds good. So, you know, for us, as I mentioned, we were not previously doing any work that was directly connected to the election cycle. This is really our first foray into it, but 2020, 2022, all of those things led us to where we are now in 2024. Understanding the fact that we are in a housing crisis, we have one of the highest vacancy rates in the country, yet we have enough occupiable housing for all the people who need housing in New Orleans, and economic inequity. Are the median income for an artist or hospitality worker is about $17,000. And they also are the generators and the fuel for $1 billion carnival industry. That's just Carnival's one of the things that we do here in New Orleans, right? We have lots of other creative and cultural economy drivers, and at the root of it are hospitality workers and artists. And so they have become the most vulnerable, but are also the most extracted from. We live in the incarceration capital of the United States, which is the incarceration capital of the world. And we have, like I mentioned, the creative economy disparity. And so in us being able to kind of look around and recognize that the community that we serve and the folks that we say are sacred, you know, have that sacred role of being artists and culture bearers who have found themselves in, and we are finding ourselves to be the most vulnerable in community and the most used, if you will. What we elected to do was to find ways in which we could, again, like I mentioned before, leverage our platform to be able to engage folks. Now, being in New Orleans, in Louisiana, we don't have a large corporate base. So, you know, you talked to, and also our median income tends to be lower than other places, even though, you know, there are a lot of things happening in New Orleans, and there's a lot of fun to be had. And there are people, you know, we are in a city of haves and have-nots, with more have-nots than haves. And so what we have found is it's been very difficult to fundraise at the local level. Since Katrina, the number of nonprofits really just blew up. I think there were like a third of the number of nonprofits in New Orleans prior to Katrina than there are now. So the number of folks who are going after the same small pot of dollars has increased. And so for us, that has been a challenge. And so what we have done as a strategy is look to national resources to be able to support the work that we're doing, because we are a local based and local serving organization, but we have global reach. We have partners in different countries. We have programmatic initiatives that are connecting our local community um, to others in the globe. And so we've had to really lean into building and cultivating relationships at the national level, cultivating partnerships with other organizations and nonprofits that work in the space that we work. And we have been looking for other ways that we can identify resources to help fund this work on a sustainable level. The fact that also we are an organization that doesn't just do one thing, and we are an arts organization. So when people hear Ashe Cultural Arts Center, they think it's this, small place where people come and do, they maybe draw or do a cake party or something. They have no idea that it really is a community and economic development driver, an anchor institution in the community that does a lot of different things. And so that can become a challenge to translate that so that funders understand what the organization does in really impactful ways, and to also connect it to their focus area. So as I mentioned before, we've been really leaning on relationships that we have that are existing, which has been pretty successful, and having those folks to be able to reach out to their network and connect us to resources. But we've also been doing things like trying to figure out what makes sense for individual giving campaigns, because that's a huge opportunity for us, but also a challenge given the economics in the city. And then thinking about how do we do things like tap into potential donor advised funds, where there are lots of dollars that are being circulated, but somehow around organizations like ours that are doing the work in community, right? So like, how do we tap into those dollars that exist in our community to be able to benefit the community? And then, connecting with expertise to help us do all of this.
It's amazing. Thank you so, so much. Yeah, wanted to open up the floor for anyone to ask any questions, and whether about their work or how anything you heard today may reflect the work that you're doing right now ahead of November.
Also, I can have a question. Hi, I'm Farley. I'm she, her. I'm in Cary, North Carolina. Um, I'm curious about messaging in an election year and how to sort of prepare for different possibilities, especially in the national elections, but even at the local level. So first is how might you think about that? Do you have sort of two ways you can go in fundraising for year end, for example, not so much ramping up to the election and for candidates, but sort of responding to whatever happens, preparing for year end. And I guess maybe preparing more for the outcome that would be less friendly to one's mission. I heard in some of, you've been talking about 2020 and 2022, like you're staying on your organizational message and not sort of worrying so much about the outcomes of the election. There's always a next step, there's always a response. But could you sort of riff on how to think about that? Because I mean, what you don't want to do is say like, oh no, it didn't go our way and therefore we have our tail between our legs and like we're so sad. I think the flip side of that would be like, hooray, like, goodness has triumphed and now we have everything we need. You don't want to drop the ball either way. I would love to hear from all of y'all, but one will be great too.
Yeah. So what I would just say for us has been, because again, we are a 501c3. And so we aren't campaigning in any direction. We're not telling people how to vote.
Right.
But we do focus on education. And so something that we talk about as a staff and as a team, and that we hope and that we're working on, I should say, to translate into our messaging is that the work that we do, that, you know, kind of like everything is everything, right? The work that we do, no matter what it is, relates to the lives of the people that we serve, and being able to talk about, for example, I think I mentioned maybe or not, there's a 25 to 30-year disparity in the life expectancy of Black and white New Orleanians. And, you know, we have decided that, you know, our wellness manifesto that we have established through our I Deserve It program is that we deserve to live well. Like we have a whole, you know, manifesto about it, but we invite our community to then also join us in that and make their statements about what they believe they deserve. And so our messaging is really focused on two parts, I guess. It would be the data and information that matter to people, and then utilizing our programming or our organizational focus, whatever that might mean, to translate that thing and make it digestible to people. And so, you know, we might be talking about, you know, we are in an increasingly hostile environment. So we just moved from in Louisiana, a Democratic governor to a Republican governor, but it's not just any Republican governor. It's someone who has essentially stated that our city, he intends to put under a microscope, to state nicely. But that funding would be not just no longer available, but extracted from communities and from programming and initiative that don't align with this particular agenda. Leadership and opportunity has already begun to significantly shift. And so we are in an environment where folks are afraid and also unsure about how to move forward so that they're not becoming a target. And so, you know, for us, one, we stand really strongly in our identity of who we are as an organization, which isn't exactly aligned with the agenda and the preferences of the current administration. But, you know, we think that, you know, standing strong in who we are, speaking to the things that we think are important and believe that we can do that on behalf of our community. And that is important. And there's power in that, right? Like being clear-minded about who we are and what we're doing, and recognizing that it may not be popular right now, but it's still important because who we are isn't changing just because who's in charge has changed.
Yeah, and to build off that, LaShonda, I thought that was great. Yeah, and I know for us too, it's similar. We're always trying to meet people where they are, you know, and so we we may go through the exercise of writing like the win press release moment, right, versus the here's the loss. But in the end, what it really comes down to is, you know, we really do take the time to try to analyze what just happened, right? Whether it's at the federal level or for us, you know, a lot of times state and local races. And we try to sit with it for a minute. If there is a moment where there's like a really big win, a big victory, we will try to get something out to our supporters as soon as possible, letting them know. But if, like, for instance, 2022, when we lost the governor's race, Carlos Guillermo Smith, who is now senator-elect, actually ended up losing his reelection to the state house when millions of dollars were spent to unseat him from the Republican Party. And so it was a really tough election night. And I think our executive director, Nadine Smith, she always comes at it from Equality Florida has a tone of hope and honesty, right? And so our messaging, sometimes we just got to sit there and be like, hey, we're not going to send something out the day after. Like, we all just need to like sit with what just happened and feel the feelings that we need to feel. And then we're going to come at it and say, hey, you know, we're not going to sugarcoat what just happened. Like, this sucks. You know, here's what we lost. Here's, you know, sort of the brutal impacts of what just happened. But also, we want you to remember that we did have bright spots. And so for 2022, for instance, we had some historic races won by openly Black LGBTQ leaders. The first ones in the Florida legislature, in the House and in the Senate. We also ousted at least 3 anti-LGBTQ incumbents from the Florida legislature, 2 of them anti-LGBTQ Democrats. And so it's kind of one of those moments where we just wanted to put in perspective for folks, like, we get it, it sucks, but we need to remember that, like, there were some bright moments and our work is not done. And same with the victory side, because even if we won every single race that we wanted to, up and down the ballot, you know, the last thing we want people to think is the work is done. We definitely want to remind them that, hey, now's the time to use this momentum. We have a chance to make, you know, critical changes. But now more than ever, like, we need you to invest in this work that we're doing so that we can see that pendulum swing back towards progress. So just some of the framing, hope and honesty is what we always try to bring to the table.
Thanks for that, y'all. Deborah, we will pass to you right now. Just wanted to let Fairly know the first session we did on messaging and storytelling around different scenarios for the election, so we can get you those slides and that recording. So we'll
Oh,
try.
that'd be great. Okay.
Yep.
Well, thanks for asking questions that's already been answered, but that was really helpful.
That's what they're here for. I just learned from them too. So makes our job better. Deborah?
Thank you. And I'm sorry. I literally have somebody with a jackhammer about 10 feet away from my office window right now. And so we've actually already seen a downturn. And I had to lay off and or furlough half of my staff, and I'm closing one of my offices now. Just we're in the environmental education space. And just you know, as the executive director, right, I have to think about messaging, but I'm also thinking about my staff. And I'm wondering how different organizations are just managing the potential for crisis within their organizations, not even with their bigger, you know, like community, but at work, given what could happen. And that maybe is not what this call is about, but I'm just curious.
Brittany or LaShonda?
Ooh, well, first, Deborah, I'm so sorry. That is so difficult. And, you know, I think something as an organization that we're constantly trying to think about is sort of the wellness and health of our staff. It's been many years in a row of constant attacks, you know, and on our communities. And I think one of the things we try to, one of the amazing benefits that Equality Florida is able to bring to our staff is free mental health care. And so we try to remind staff constantly of that benefit and to use it as much as they can throughout, you know, throughout an election year, throughout any year, to use that that benefit. But yeah, I think we try to allow folks to hold space too, right? Like, you know, we say we bring a tone of hope and optimism and honesty, but that also means that we try to give our staff as much space as possible too, to just, you know, kind of express how they're feeling and what they're feeling, and the experiences that they have gone through. And I don't know how helpful that always is, but just trying to like create that space that we know this work is incredibly difficult, and is not easy by any means. We try to do kind of, we have like an unlimited amount of comp time for our staff as well, so that if there is that space that's needed from the work, or if folks are working, you know, our field team in particular, who are just working weekend after weekend, knocking on doors or at pride events or whatever that looks like, that they do have that time off. And we really push people to take their PTO and their comp time, to again, just try to fully step away from the work whenever possible. But I don't know if that was super helpful or not, but LaShonda, if you have other insights, or anybody, I'm all ears to bring back to my team too.
Yeah, unfortunately, and Deborah, first, also, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know that that is really tough as a leader when we have to make those kind of decisions. And I don't really have an answer for you around the sustainability piece as it relates to that. But what I can say is that, as Brittany mentioned, this work, or the work that we do in social justice, it can be very heavy and very challenging. And something that we have is calling in Black Day. So like, when the work is just a bit much, or people have been really um, going hard at it, that they can, take some time off. Wellness, mental health wellness is really important. We also have wellness days. In fact, next Tuesday, we'll have an all-day wellness day for all staff to participate, and just to be able to be together and not be focused on work or production, and recognizing that there is, we need space for that. The other thing that I was going to say that I totally have lost now, maybe it'll come back to me, but is transparency. Is that, we've just tried to be very transparent with our staff about where things are. And, even when we're maybe approaching a cliff and saying, hey guys, this is kind of where we are. This is what we're working on and trying to do. So that at least people are prepared and have, that kind of, as much courtesy as we can give as far as notice if things need to change. We recently had to let go of some folks for a particular initiative that we had because we really did just run out of funds. And another that we have, that's a pretty expensive initiative that we have, that we were able to get some extension of funding, but have been very transparent with the staff that are working on that initiative, that we may not have funding for this initiative as important as it is to us beyond this particular point, to give people the ability to make informed decisions, and also to just, I don't know, feel respected. I feel that happens often, that we focus on productivity and not on people sometimes, right? And then we miss the opportunity to give people the courtesy we wish that we would have.
Thank you both for those insights. Deborah, we also have a training, a Fundraising Friday training that we've done in the past that may be helpful for you. I can get the link for you. It's on surges and cliffs. So it's like what your organization should do when you are receiving a large surplus of money kind of unexpectedly, and how to prepare for dealing with that, but also the opposite. So like what happens when the funding shrinks or goes away, and how do you kind of prepare around that? So I'll be happy to share that link with you after we're done.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. We have 4 minutes left. If anyone else has any final questions.
Kafele, I would love to just note that, only 2% of philanthropic funding goes to organizations led by people of color. And so that is not answering your question, but I think it's relevant and it's important, that as we're thinking about organizations that are led by people of color, in particular Black women, are receiving the lowest percentage or portion of philanthropic funding that's available. And so as you guys are convening these conversations around fundraising and philanthropy, I think noting that, and also maybe identifying, ways in which, your organization and others who are doing this work can really help to support the change in the sort of systemic level, viewpoint or narrative around why Black-led and Black women-led organizations are or aren't being funded at the rate that they should be. In particular, those that are doing really impactful work, whose counterparts that are doing similar work that is often not as impactful, but are getting, multiple times the funding.
100%. There are a lot of conversations that are being had about those disparities within philanthropy, and like our role as a funding intermediary. And also, like, I think everyone's role is where you have the opportunity to get in front of funders, like doing that funder education and being able to push the field at large. And I think that we all have a responsibility to do that, because those disparities really reflect the systems of oppression that we are working to dismantle. So, it is something that has been difficult for this sector to change, especially disheartening after, the promises of 2020 and, the kind of rollback of a lot of that funding. But we are almost at time. I wanted to thank all of you for joining, especially you, Brittany, and LaShonda and Aaliyah earlier. Hope these 2 sessions have been useful and helpful for you all. We will be resuming Fundraising Friday again in August, so hopefully we'll see some of you all there. Thank you again so much, and enjoy the rest of your week and your weekends.
Thanks for the invite. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for the invitation.
Bye.